Snap out of it. The Department of Agriculture reporting that 10% of all food stamp payments in 2022 were errors. Take a look at how the government is supersizing those benefits. In 2019, $55.6 billion was spent under former President Trump. After the pandemic in 2022, $110 billion, double spent under President Biden. Joining us now, Ohio Congressman Warren Davidson. Congressman, it's good to have you with us today. Those are staggering figures, and I do realize that part of this is as a result of the year-long crisis that I would call the pandemic, but the numbers haven't come back down, and there's two problems here. Number one, the waste, but also we were talking about this disconnect between how people feel, some of the data that we're getting out there. I have to believe that handouts in other forms, not necessarily stimulus checks, but food stamps, for example, are still keeping people on the sidelines. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that shows up. I mean, if you look at labor force participation, it still hasn't recovered to pre-pandemic levels. And frankly, it took a lot to get it turned off. I mean, just remember that May 11th was the magic date that Congress was able to pressure Joe Biden into conceding that the emergency is over. And a lot of things kind of coincide with, end of first quarter, start of second quarter, where some of these big expenditures, the kind of supersized burn rate, went away. And we haven't yet seen all those people go back out and participate in the economy.
Congressman, we've got to do something about these food stamp numbers. OK, just look at it for a second. $110 billion. We have more than 9 million open jobs in this country. People can earn money to buy food, to make a living. But the administrative state is simply running away with this spending. And it's not even really getting a lot of congressional oversight. What are you guys doing to try to pull back on some of this spending that happened during the pandemic and frankly just continues to roll on with no end in sight?
Well, the big win there was the debt ceiling. So recall that in 2018, Republicans tried to tie work requirements to food stamps, and we couldn't get it through with Republican control of the House, the Senate, and with Donald Trump in the White House. We weren't able to get past the 60 vote threshold in the Senate. As part of the debt ceiling, we got work requirements. Now, it's not as big and robust as we want, but fundamentally it says the same thing. Everybody I know would help a friend in need out, but at some point they would look to their friend and say, you're going to get a job, right? I mean, everybody's hiring, just like you said, or at least you're going to go to school or volunteer somewhere. So that's going to be mandatory for people that are 18 to 54 with no dependent kids at home. With only about 8% waivers. So states can have waivers for, say, an economically depressed county, but that is going to change. And we haven't yet seen that flow through the economy, but we got that through. The part that isn't done yet is, fraud. Like 10% of this is fraud. And, if you think about a credit card company, if they had 10% payouts fraudulent, I mean, they'd go bankrupt. So perhaps the federal government needs to outsource its fraud management program, or at least states do. The federal government could always hold states accountable for reimbursing the full fraudulent amount in each state.
Outsource it to a private company. Those people usually get it done. Congressman, I want to switch topics with you if I can. You've introduced a bill talking about hostile foreign entities that are buying up Americans' private data, and your bill, of course, wants to prevent that. Is it more than just about TikTok at this point?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And frankly, even our own government sometimes is buying up this data. So Sarah Jacobs, a Democrat from San Diego, and I have built a coalition of progressives and conservatives that are fundamentally protecting Americans' privacy rights. So we can't have our own government circumventing anything that they would otherwise have to get a warrant for. They can't just buy that out in the market and say, oh, we don't need a warrant for it. And the reality is we don't need to put our own government at a disadvantage when you have foreign governments like China or non-state actors buying up this data. Privacy is really infringed. We are in a bad situation with respect to defense of that right that's supposed to be protected by our Fourth Amendment. And that's what this amendment we have through this year's appropriations process intends to do, is to further protect privacy.
And I understand that, but I think a lot of Americans sit at home and they think everyone has my data anyways. What's the big deal? Can you sort of quantify for people sitting at home how important it is that their data is protected? Because we all look at our phones and think, oh, well, everyone has their data anyways, and sort of brush it off.
Well, look, freedom surrendered is rarely reclaimed. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do that. I mean, it's important that we reclaim it. The founding fathers protected the right to privacy with the Fourth Amendment for a reason. And look, the reality is it has been hacked, stolen, sold, monetized in every way that you could imagine. So the task is not small, but the consequences are big. I mean, if you look what's gone on, look, Elon Musk basically bought a crime scene at Twitter. Matt Taibbi's trying to expose this, but the first part of it begins with spying on Americans, social media content, and then restricting speech. So first was the breach of privacy. And if you look at bank records, Americans lost their minds rightly when they wanted to snoop on bank accounts for the IRS if you had $600 of activity or more. The reality is Bank of America handed over records with no warrant to the government that said, hey, here's people who bought stuff in Washington, D.C. on these dates. And oh, by the way, these are the same people that either bought a weapon or ammunition or something else over the prior 6 months. So these are sweeping things that would never be allowed in a regular warrant process, but it's all being done to violate the right to privacy.
Well said. And thanks for quantifying the risks for us. Congressman Warren Davidson, really appreciate it.